1 Corinthians 13. We know it as the love chapter. It's Paul's exposition of love expressed poetically, but leaving nothing out. Our souls resonate, I think, to the truths of what Paul writes here, because either we have experienced love in some fashion like this at some point in our lives, or some of us are desperate to experience it even now. With extraordinary understanding and pristine clarity, with unmuddied sensitivity and spiritual depth, Paul has mined the very essence of the Christian gospel for us. It is no wonder that whenever Christians gather to worship, wherever the gospel is proclaimed, 1 Corinthians 13 is known and it is loved. Look at the man who wrote this hymn of love. In fact, this passage of Scripture has been put to music many times over. It was written by Paul, who was formerly Saul of Tarsus. And you know his story, right? We meet him in the book of Acts as the fellow who was hell-bent on destroying this new movement, which was known as the Way, which we call today Christianity. And Saul felt that God had called him to destroy these followers of Jesus of Nazareth. He went on a mission. He went to Damascus to seek to stamp out the church, to put to death all those who in his mind at that point as Saul, he thought were blaspheming God by claiming Christ as the Messiah. That this man, Paul, could probe the essence of divine love and express it in such beautiful poetry and profound clarity, I think is one of the miracles of Christ's transforming grace and power at work in Paul's life and in our lives. It began, you see, with his transformation on the road to Damascus when Saul, who did later become Paul after this event, met the resurrected Christ in a vision and received Jesus into his heart, accepting Christ as the Lord of his life. Paul went, you see, from tormentor of the church to the defender of the faith. Can you hear it described in 1 Corinthians 13? Because what Paul is doing here is describing the grace and the mercy that he himself experienced in his own life through the love of God in Jesus Christ, so beautifully expressed in this chapter. And he says to all of us, as Christians, we must love as Christ loved us. And ever since Paul, I think others have expressed and experienced that grace and known that love which is the heartbeat of God. John Wilhelm Roundtree experienced it. He was a brilliant young English historian. And at the very time when the promise of his learning and his devout personal life was about to be fulfilled, he went to the doctor and he discovered that his eyesight was failing. And the day when his physician actually told him the devastating truth that soon he would be totally blind, John Roundtree came out of that consultation, walked into the street, and the sunlight for a few moments flooded over him and in him, and his well-ordered and carefully controlled world, he knew, was falling to pieces all around him. But something greater was happening to him as he let go of control over his life and gave it to Christ. For he would later write, "As I stood there, I suddenly felt the love of God wrap me about as though a vision presence enfolded me, and a joy filled me with such as I have never known before." Have you been there? When you were at the lowest of your low, And God has entered in with his grace and with his mercy and filled you with a sense of peace and with a sense of joy. Have you personally experienced the grace and the mercy of God who truly loves you with an everlasting love? Many people will say, I have felt the love of God. But do they know what the love of God really is? Because I'll tell you, there are some misconceptions of love out there. Some say that love is only a feeling. A lot of you think love is some kind of an emotion. It's kind of a knot in your stomach, a certain kind of physical feeling that you have. We're always searching for that feeling. It's been known to produce broken hearts and goosebumps and loss of appetite and starry eyes. Because some of us think that all it is a feeling. When we talk about falling into love, when we talk about falling out of love as if it's some kind of an accident, which basically means we either feel emotions or we don't feel emotions. But the Bible never defines love as an emotion, never. Emotion accompanies love, yes, but love is always an action. Another misconception is that love is uncontrollable. When people talk about being in love, they say, I feel giddy, my head's spinning, I'm weak in my knees. But love is certainly not uncontrollable. If we believe that it's uncontrollable, that's just something, and that it's just something that happens to us, and of course, yeah, we should probably say we fall into something that we cannot change. But that's wrong. We have control. See, puppy love does not last through the dog days of life. I don't know about you, but I want love that's going to last longer than a 2-hour movie or a 250-page novel. Today we're going to look at love. The love that really will make a difference in our life, in our relationships, in our marriages, and yes, in our church. And we need to look at two things. First, we have to ask, what is love? And the second is, we have to learn to act like love acts. So let's ask, what is love? Well, number one, love is a matter of choice. Paul writes in Colossians 3:14, we read it earlier, and over all virtues, put on love, which binds them all together. Clothe yourself in love. It's just like when you got up this morning, you looked in your closet, you had a choice of what to put on. Paul says, put on love. It's not something we are a victim of. It's something we choose. And in Colossians 3:14 in your Bible, I would underline the phrase, over all virtues, put on love, which binds them all together. Now, Paul wouldn't have asked us to put on something you can't control and you can only feel. And so you have a choice. Second, love is a matter of conduct. It's a matter of behavior. It's a matter of action. Let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and truth. Remember, we read that at the beginning of the service. That's what John says. It's more than what we say. It's a behavior. John was telling us to back up love with our actions. A guy was always telling his girlfriend, oh, honey, I would die for you. And she said, oh, you're always telling me that, but you never do it. A wife comes to her husband, says, you're always watching the football game. You must love football more than me. And he says, yes, I do, honey. But I love you more than basketball. All right. Love is more than words. It's action. In fact, look at 1 Corinthians 13. Paul offers here 15 actions to define love. Now, we not only need to define love, you see, we need to act like love acts. We need to act like these verses in Corinthians suggest that we act. So notice the first thing Paul says. Love is alive when it has patience, dying when it is hurried, and dead when it cannot wait. Love is patient. Be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love. That's what Paul advises in Ephesians 4:2. He says to make allowance for one another's faults because we love people. We know what it's like in a relationship to turn the other cheek and to walk the second mile, to be patient with someone we love. Patience isn't always easy, though, for us. It's very difficult for me sometimes to be patient. So you know what I have to do when I have a hard time being patient with somebody? Probably the best thing, even for others to do, is to constantly remember God's incredible patience with you, with me, with us. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. While we were unloving and unwilling, he was willing to wait on us. So love is patient. He goes on and he says, as a second point, love is alive when it cares, dying when it forgets, dead when it ignores. Love is kind. Be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God has forgiven you. We need to define kindness here, the ability to care for each other in the practical details of life. And I've defined kindness here for you because I think kindness can be mystical if we're not careful. I think kindness must flesh itself out in a relationship just by the practical day in and day out activities of living, being polite, saying please and thank you, being respectful, being diplomatic. It's interesting, isn't it? But if you think about it, sometimes it's often easier to be kind to a stranger than it is to be kind to the people closest to us, who love us most, who know us too well, because we know exactly which button to push to get a reaction. But I've noticed something else about kindness. It's very difficult for some people to express kindness. In recent years, there's been a major increase in greeting card sales, Christmas cards and birthday cards and get well cards and friendship cards. There's an amazing amount of growth in the card industry, and I think sometimes we buy cards for one another because it so succinctly says what we really feel, but we cannot express. It's just easier to give a card than to visually or verbally let a person know that you love them. I like cards, especially humorous cards. I saw one the other day. I thought it kind of fit in this sermon section. If I had an ice cream cone, I'd give you half. If I had 6 candies, you'd get 3. If I had 2 apples, 1 would be yours. And if I won the lottery, I'd send you a postcard from Tahiti. Consider Ephesians 4:32 with me. Paul defines kindness so well. Listen to this. Be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another just as God has forgiven you. If only we could share that with the world. The only way that I can have a relationship with anyone is to have forgiveness at the very core of that relationship. And that relationship is going to grow and develop not based on perfection, because no one is perfect. It's only going to blossom through the willingness of each person to be forgiving and kind. Paul said, forgive others as you have been forgiven by God. And when I see how God forgave me, I then have the power to forgive someone else. Did you hear me? I believe those who have difficulty in forgiving others have really never had a biblical understanding of forgiveness, of what has been done for them by God through Jesus Christ. Because the moment we understand what God has done for us, it changes our whole view of forgiving one another. Mother Teresa once said, the biggest disease today is not leprosy or tuberculosis, but rather the feeling of being unwanted, uncared for, and lonely. Where's the kindness? Where's the forgiveness? The third thing that Paul says is love is alive when it is secure, dying when it starts doubting, dead when it stops trusting. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. Do you see the equation? Envy plus boasting plus pride equals insecurity. Security is truly the key to any relationship. You show me a good relationship, whether it's a marriage or a friendship, and I will show you that at the very heart of that relationship is security, commitment, a confidence. The two people who feel secure share their hearts with one another. They're vulnerable. They're honest with each other. They can lay it on the line knowing that the other person has their interests at heart at all times. They can get down to the real issues and never in a revengeful way. Show me people in a relationship who cannot talk about the real issues and aren't able to look at each other with honesty and integrity, and I'll show you a relationship that lacks security. And I can say one more thing about security in a relationship. You don't have a relationship if security isn't the foundation of it. You may get together and you may do things and you may go to some wonderful places together and you may have a conversation, but security is always the foundation of a love relationship. Juan Carlos Ortiz was talking to a circus trapeze performer about the net that was below him when he performed, and asked the performer what it did for him. And the performer said, well, obviously, it keeps me safe. But he said, let me tell you what that net down below really does for me. It makes me a better performer. And Ortiz asked, what do you mean it makes you a better performer? He said, it's very simple. Because the net is there, I feel secure. And because I feel secure, I'm willing to risk more. And I'm willing to try an extra turn, an extra twist. I'm willing to try a trick that I wouldn't have tried at all. But that security releases me to reach my potential. And I believe that's exactly true in a marriage, in a friendship, in a relationship. Where there's security, the other person is allowed to reach their potential. The fourth thing that Paul says is that love is alive when it is giving, dying when it begins an exchange, and dead when it's always taking. If love is anything, it's a giving relationship. God models it better than any one of us because he was the first one to give. And that's hard to do, to be the first one to give. You see, to give first means I have to be vulnerable. What happens if I give and the other person doesn't give back? What happens if I take the first step and they don't meet me? And so many times, even if we want to give in a relationship, we settle for a much lower level that is basically negotiating or exchanging. We say, I'll do this for you as long as you'll do that for me. We keep score. What a terrible way to go through life, basically saying, I did something for them yesterday, so it's their turn to do something for me today. You lose the best things in life if you're constantly waiting for someone else to even the score or make up that which you began. Love's not that way. Love is giving. C.S. Lewis, I think, was an incredible person. Most of you probably have read some of his stuff. A few years ago, Dr. Grayson Carter was here and spoke about Lewis's life at the adult Bible school. And he spoke of Lewis's book, which was turned into a movie entitled Shadowland. It's the story of C.S. Lewis and his love relationship with his life. And C.S. Lewis said something about love in that book that I think is one of the most perceptive quotes on love that I've ever read. C.S. Lewis said that to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to be sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness, but in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken, but it will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The only place outside of heaven where you can be safe from all dangers of love is hell. And the fifth thing that Paul says is love is alive when it acts its way into feeling. Dying when it feels but doesn't act, or acts but doesn't feel. And dead when it no longer feels or acts. It always protects, it always trusts, it always perseveres. We know that actions tremendously impact feelings. There are two types of people. Those who feel good before they do something, and those who do something before they feel good. And when I used to do a great deal of marriage counseling, sometimes a couple would come in and say that their marriage was dead. There was no more love. They couldn't love anymore. And I would say something like this: give it a week. I want you to go home, and for a week, I want you to at least try to act like you love your spouse. I remember the response. They look at me and say, Pastor, are you crazy? How can I go home and act like I'm in love when I don't feel anything? And I would tell them, allow your love to mature. Allow your actions to determine your feelings. You see, mature people understand that actions determine feelings, and immature people think that feelings determine actions. And I would tell them, I want you to go back and I want you to act lovingly towards your spouse for a week. Say words of love to your spouse. Do acts of kindness. I want you to allow those actions to pave the way for love. You see, Jesus didn't tell us just to go love one another. Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. And there's a major difference between the two. If we love one another as Christ has loved us, well, let's go to the cross for a moment. Jesus dying on the cross for the world is not a picture of God loving nice people because he had fuzzy feelings inside. It's not a picture of God loving his friends. It's a picture of God loving people who really were unlovable at that point. I mean, think about it. The Jews could hardly wait to get rid of Jesus, and when I mean get rid of Jesus, kill him. They planned and plotted, at least their leaders did, for months. And Pilate, he just wanted to get all of Jesus' blood off of his hands. Their hatred for Christ was so intense that they were willing to release a well-known common criminal from prison just so that Jesus would be done in. I mean, when the Lord died for us, my friends, he wasn't dying in some nice church service like this one where everybody was holding hands and singing, Kumbaya, my Lord. Those who crucified him hated his guts. They spit on him. They cursed him. They could hardly wait to see him die. And with great joy they watched as he did die. To which Jesus responded lovingly, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Christ said, love one another as I have loved you. Love one another as I have loved you. That's hard. It's major. That means we're to love people who don't love us. That means we're not allowed to let how someone responds to us or acts towards us define how we respond to them. We need to love them no matter what. Jesus really does mean walk the second mile. Turn the other cheek. So I'd like to end with a poem you've probably heard before, but I think maybe in this moment, hearing it again will speak to your hearts and to your minds. The verses of this poem reportedly were written on the wall of Mother Teresa's home for children in Calcutta, India, and are widely attributed to her, but there is some evidence that some of the verses came from other places, but it's still powerful. It says, people are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyways. If you are honest and sincere people, if you are an honest and sincere person, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. When you spend years creating, others could destroy it overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will probably be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, even though you'll be told it's never enough. Give your best anyway. Yes, people are illogical, unreasonable, self-centered. Love them anyway. For in the final analysis, it's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway.